Welcome to the Kentucky Kernel Sports Podcast. I'm Alden Flowers, and I'm joined by three amazing people with me on Zoom this week. We're on Zoom for the second time this year because, it's basketball season. We got people traveling all over the place, going to all kinds of basketball games, like the important one you got to see last night. Cole, how'd that go?
It was actually a pretty good game, back and forth between Kentucky and number one Kansas, but the Jayhawks ended up going on a late run to kind of pull away and win that one in a narrow 89-84 battle. And that was with free throws at the end. Really and truly, it was 87-84. It was a really, really close game and great atmosphere in the United Center up in Chicago. Just got back a little under an hour ago. So
Yeah, it felt really close throughout the entire game. Even when Kentucky went into half, I think it was 7 because Hunter Dickinson had hit the 3 right before half, and that felt like a big play, let alone it felt tight all the way through. It was runs in the first half. Second half, it felt like it was just going to be a battle down low, see who could hit more free throws. I think it was something like 50 free throws that were taken in the game. It was a battle. I think both these teams are going to live up to the expectations that both fan bases seem to have for them, and I'm really excited to see what happens next.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, last time we talked, Kentucky had just beat their season opening game against New Mexico State. That was all they'd done. Since then, they got that pretty dominant win over Texas A&M Commerce, 81-61. Only real notable thing to take away from that, you have 5 players in double figures there. Reeves actually hit from the 3-point line, which he didn't necessarily do against Kansas. He went 5 for 8 with 21 points, led the team. But going to the Kansas game, which was obviously the biggest one, there's a lot of things that stuck out to me a lot. And that was, I think that Kentucky fans, by nature of being Kentucky fans, might overreact this a little bit. I think that, in sports generally, there's no such thing as a moral victory, but there are more victories here. Absolutely. There's no way you can't come out of this feeling a lot better about Kentucky than you did before it. Because, I was talking to some people behind the scenes. I was saying myself, I was hoping that Kentucky could just keep it close. I was hoping it was going to be close. Maybe they were going to lose by, 11, as long as they didn't get ran off the court. Well, they didn't get ran off the court. In fact, up until the very end there, they were right there to win it. You had 24 coming from Reeves, but a little bit, he had 7 free throws there, I believe, 3 for 17 from the 3-point line. You just can't have him there at the end shooting those. It was clearly the wrong call that gave Kansas the win. But, a couple guys that maybe you didn't expect to really shine. Adu Thiero had a double-double, 16 points, 13 rebounds. Rob Dillingham, 18 points, went absolutely insane in the first half there, hit 4 straight threes. He hit the 2, and then I think it was the third one was kind of a little bit deeper. And when he pulled that, I was up in the press box, just sitting there next to Samantha. I was like, I was already starting to say, like, why would you take that shot, man? And then it went in, and I was like, never mind, take that shot as much as you want to. Obviously, he had 18 points with 4 straight 3-pointers, with the Reeves hitting the 5th straight one there. So really just electric atmosphere when that went on. And Reed Shepherd, Kentucky kid, freshman, hit 13 points, 3 for 4 from beyond the arc. And a little bit of a, hot take. Maybe I would have rather him taking that last shot there than Reeves. He was clearly on, but, that's not how the cards fell. Kentucky was ultimately within 5, really and truly within 3, minus the last free throws. But I think that's massive. Obviously it's the biggest storyline. Kentucky didn't have any of its bigs at all. All 3 of the bigs were out. They clearly Kentucky did all right rebounding, but it clearly showed in the paint. Kentucky was outscored in the paint 42-24. They weren't getting anything down low, let's say. But even beyond just that, on top of that, just a little sidebar, Hunter Dickinson actually broke Oscar Tshiebwe's Champions Classic record, setting a new all-time rebounding record in the game with 21. He had 27 points, 21 rebounds. I think it's the first time a Big 12 player has had 20 and 20 since, I want to say, Blake Griffin, actually, which is super, super impressive stat for Hunter Dickinson there. He's going to be an absolute beast. DeJuan Harris, KJ Adams, all both really impactful players. But who wasn't impactful in this game? DJ Wagner and Justin Edwards. Oh my goodness. I'm kind of rambled along here a little bit. They want to combine 1 for 18 from the field. Absolutely unreal. Edwards with 1 total point all night long. You can't have those 2 5-star potential lottery picks going out and just not being there whatsoever.
Yeah, I think definitely. Go ahead, Josh.
Oh, sorry. No, you're good. I thought that It was a very impressive showing by Kentucky. I'm generally with you, Cole. I'm generally not the one that believes in taking moral victories, but I don't think it's wrong wrong at all to be excited about the trajectory of the team. You figure they did this without their three big men, without much of an identity really offensively or defensively, really as a team. And coming in and put up a performance like that, it's not a clunker. It is a loss, but it's certainly not a clunker. Although I think by marching by the beat of that same drum, there are no moral victories at Kentucky. I think that it's definitely an attitude shift by the fan base collectively to take a moral victory from a game that you led 14 by. I feel like if this game had happened a few years ago, fans would be furious that you blew a 14-point lead to Kansas. Now, granted, we all knew that Kansas was going to come back. We all knew that it was going to be competitive. The game itself was a game of runs. But I think it's definitely an attitude shift to suddenly go like, oh, the players are young, we're inexperienced, when young and inexperienced was how Cal actually built his entire legacy here. I don't think, and it was never an excuse during, or it's never been an excuse during his tenure. So I think to suddenly take a moral victory and air in it now is a little weird. And I think part of that is honestly because Kentucky, and this is my biggest observation from the game, still lacks a clear identity. I think it really showed early in the game when they looked flustered. It really showed late in the game when they lost it late in the game. I think Kansas closed the game on like a 16-4 run or something like that. I mean, it's when you really boil it down, I think Kentucky is still finding themselves. They're still finding who is going to be taking the ball in those late game possessions, because you can't just toss it to Antonio Reeves when he's shooting 3 for 17 or 3 for 17, 3 for 18.
3 for 17.
3 for 17. You can't toss it to him over and over on a night when he's running cold. DJ Wagner didn't do anything. Justin Edwards didn't do anything. And Reed Shepherd was hot, but I mean, he didn't end up getting that shot. Rob Dillingham was on the bench. I mean, it was just Kentucky is still missing that person with the it factor late in the game to really take control in those late game situations and finish it off. And that was something that I think just kind of came back to bite him in the end.
See, I actually disagree with you a little bit there. I do think Kentucky has an identity, and I think going away from that identity is what lost them this game. And Calipari's talked about it, but the identity is almost the lack of an identity in that way. It's random basketball, and that's, going to whoever's hot right now, just going to who. And admittedly, Rob Dillingham forced Calipari's hand a little bit, picking up a pretty bad fourth foul there on a steal attempt. I mean, you really should have just decommitted from that one. You weren't getting that steal. Don't get a dumb foul like that. But, random basketball is going to who's hot. It's playing anyone on the court can do anything at one moment. And if you're supposed to be playing random, why are you going to Antonio Reeves on every possession? If, trying to force Reeves to be that guy in that spot, you would have hoped he could have been. But if he's not, don't make him that. Random basketball, go to, like you just said, go to Reed, who was hot, until they get the bigs back at the very least. I mean, they're kind of forced to play a little bit smaller and forced to play a game of runs, but a game of who can hit shots right now. And I don't like that Kentucky kind of went away from that. They felt like Cal was trying to get DJ and Justin in the game. He was trying to get them going when they just weren't going. And he was trying to get Reeves that last shot right at the end. It felt like, I think Reed even had the ball a little bit at the end there and just didn't take the shot. It was almost like they were told, get that ball to Antonio. And Antonio wasn't hitting his threes. So what does that really do at that point? Get the ball to the guy who's going to miss it. And I don't say that, as someone who doesn't want Antonio Reeves to succeed, but when he's not succeeding, don't make it worse for him. You know what I mean? And I think they needed to play a looser brand of basketball. They got too tight in the end there. They got too cut into like a cookie cutter way. And I think that's what ended up losing them in this game, is that they were trying to force an identity. And when their identity thus far has been kind of thriving in the chaos of not having one, if you will.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. I definitely think that late in the game, Kentucky was absolutely trying to force something that wasn't there by passing off to Antonio, by passing off to Justin, by passing off to DJ. But if you're forcing something that isn't working in late game situations and it's not working, then you don't have an identity. Or if you do, it's an identity that isn't working. The fact that they were trying to force something that isn't their brand of basketball just shows that lack of identity. And I don't think it's wrong to, what you're describing is freelance offense, right? I don't think it's wrong to run a freelance offense, but when they tried to run it late in the game and speed up the pace, you had the Reed Shepherd turnover. right? That led to a Kansas 3. Kentucky needs to find an identity, at least in the half court offensively, and come up with quality possessions, getting the ball to shooters who aren't necessarily Antonio Reeves, especially on nights when, the thing about shooters is sometimes they go cold. And I think that you have to have guys to turn to, and that's part of what makes up that collective identity. It's not when I mention a lack of identity, it's not that Kentucky runs out on the floor and has no idea what they're doing. It's the fact that there are still nuances that are still left to be desired.
Yeah, absolutely.
You say that it's not necessarily an identity, the whole random basketball. And in second half they didn't play random basketball last night. It didn't feel like. But Josh, it sounds like you're trying to say that this random basketball isn't an identity, and it really is. I've been a fan of a team who I won't mention because I mention them every podcast that has ran the random offense, or hillbilly ball is what they call it. And it is an identity, and it will lose you games like it did last night, where you have the random basketball, but in the big moments, there's your guy. And that guy that for Kentucky will be Antonio Reeves all year. And that guy may have bad nights, but he's going to keep getting the ball in the random offense because in practice, the same guy gets it. It's just how it goes.
I think I'm being a bit misunderstood. I'm not saying that freelance offense isn't an identity. I think it is an identity. I think that especially in the modern era, in a positionless game now, right? It's a really smart way to play basketball, but you can't just jog out on the floor. You still have to run sets. You still have to execute. You still have to find the people that are hot and find ways to get the ball to them. You can't force it to the same people over and over and over. Sure, you've got your guys, but when Antonio Reeves isn't quite that guy yet, and I think last night showed that. And on that, the other side of that same coin, maybe they're looking for Edwards and Wagner to be that guy, but they didn't show up either. So I think it's just kind of a matter of going back to the drawing board a little bit in those later game situations. It's not that Kentucky doesn't have an identity; it's that they're still finding themselves.
Well, I think it's also tough to necessarily ascribe a true identity to a team that's missing all three of its bigs still. It's hard to create an identity for a team that's still so incomplete, because no matter what you do, once those guys get back, it's going to have to shift. It's going to have to change. So it's almost like, they're kind of forced to be in limbo for a little while they kind of wait for those guys to get healthy and come back in before they can really create a team that might go on to win a national championship, if that's what this team's ceiling is.
Does the 5-out stick around once the bigs get back?
I don't hope so. It was something, Bill Self himself even said after the game. He said when Trey Mitchell's in there at the 5, they're really hard to defend. They're really hard to guard. The way they play is really difficult to defend. And I'm really kind of actually scared that when the bigs come back, Kentucky will become very stale and dull. So I'm hoping that they can kind of keep some of this character and this randomness they have to them. But I guess we'll just have to see how that goes. I've been a big fan of this Kentucky team and how they've been playing so far. I think they're very, very fun to watch. And even though, the result against Kansas didn't quite go their way, I think it was still a great game and probably the best game of the entire season so far, arguably.
If there's something that needs to be touched on, I know we've really touched on the offensive side. We got to touch about how scrappy they were on the defensive side too. We've seen Kentucky teams that really had pressing intensity in the past, but I think the person that was really leading that out was Adu Thiero. And in my opinion, he was my MVP last night. Not only did he put up a double-double, but he was getting inside. And he was tasked with he was kind of told to, be in that kind of limbo area between the paint and between the arc and trying to pick up whoever is down there. And sometimes that's Hunter Dickinson. And he tried a couple times to jump the routes, but he was going to get bodied every single time, both in height and in size. And I'm not denying that Adu Thiero has not put on weight, because he looks like a beast now. If you compare him to last year to this year, the dude is like a completely different animal. And he looks great. He played great last night. Very good defensively. He's got heart. He's got intensity. That's something that I really love to see. And I feel like that really carried over into that run and kind of the midway point in the first half. When Dillingham hit those, when Reeves hit a couple, that was all kind of Thiero was essentially the catalyst who was able to kind of start off those runs with I remember he got that put back dunk, and then really good on the defensive side, grabbing boards, dishing it out, all that stuff. I think if I don't know if he'll get replaced when the bigs come. I mean, unless he wants to keep playing that 4, I think he'd be undersized in that position. But if he is still scrappy enough to play that, to get some, to get the nerves jangling, to get some steals, to get some knockouts, I'd say go for it. He's got the heart, and that's what I love to see more than anything else.
Yeah, I think one thing.
Oh, go ahead.
I think one thing that'll be interesting to me. I know we'll probably talk a little bit more about this game before we have to get into the preview and get over to the women. I know there's a lot to talk about with the women's basketball team, but one thing that stuck out to me a lot that I want to write something on. I need to go back and rewatch the game. I want to do like a real deep dive into it. Aduthiero did a lot of good things, 16 points, 13 rebounds. He actually had the worst plus minus on the entire team at -26. Nobody else was that bad. Actually, the second worst was DJ Wagner at -23. Justin Edwards was even +4, but Aduthiero was -26. And I really want to go. I mean, Calipari talked about how it had a lot to do with just, him being out at the start when Kansas was so well and him being out when Kansas was making runs. But I really want to go and dissect why that is, if it's a lineup thing or what it is. But I think it's really fascinating when you see a guy put up a double-double and the team is that much worse when he's on the court. So I really need to go. I want to go and kind of break that down and see what that is. I'm not as I don't have those answers right now. Hopefully I will soon enough. But that's something that really stuck out to me as very, very odd from the game, because I agree. I thought Aduthiero did a lot of really great things. I thought, he got beat a couple times down low when there's not much he could do really against Hunter Dickinson. But I thought he played a good game, and the plus minus said that the team was significantly worse when he was on that court. So I need to go break that down and see why that was.
That's such a strange stat, because I wouldn't think that at all.
Yeah.
I guess the only reason that I could think that was during the run at the end and the run nearing the end of halftime.
Well, the slow start as well contributed to it.
And the slow start, yeah, the going down 10. Those are the only reasons. Other than that, I mean, dude played just a solid game. He was solid all around. What I do wish, if there was, I know it's not part of his game. It never has been. But he needs to stretch. He needs to maybe develop into a bit of a stretch shooter. Because there were times where Hunter Dickinson was refusing to play him on the arc. And the dude would instead, and a dude would take the ball and he would drive right and try and initiate contact and then dish. Hunter Dickinson's too good of a defender to really for him to bite on stuff like that. So, I get it. He's not a shooter. Maybe he needs to develop that aspect of the game, stretch the floor a little bit. And if those bigs come back, maybe slot in as like a 3. Maybe you can be a stretch 4 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, big shout out to Aduthiero with a massive air ball right there in the first half. I witnessed that. That was one of those you watching, you're like,
yeah,
probably shouldn't have taken that shot.
Am I crazy, or did he hit one last night? Didn't he?
He did. I thought he hit one.
Yeah, in the corner.
But he also had a pretty bad air ball. Pretty bad air ball though.
Yeah,
pretty bad air ball at that one point. It was.
I was surprised when Trey took one on though. Well, and then I mean he hit it. And he hit like front rim, then backboard, then in. So it wasn't a pretty shot by any means. But
hey, that's Trace Mitchell, don't you know? Trace.
Obviously,
talked a lot about Kansas. We'll get a little bit into the preview here. We got 2 games coming up in the next week for Kentucky. One is significantly more important than the other one. Obviously, this Friday, I'll be at it with Sam, I believe, is going to that with me. They play Stonehill, big dogs, 1-3 on the season. They got a 57-44 win over Army. That's their only win before they lost pretty badly. I believe it was 89-44 against George Washington, and 107-67 to St. Joseph. That was UConn, 100-56 to St. Joseph's. Pretty bleak for them. They only have one player averaging double-digit points at all, and that's Shane O'Dell, and he's only averaging 10. Kentucky should have a massive bounce-back opportunity against Stonehill. But the big game we need to look at is started next week before we record our next pod, and that is St. Joseph's.
Yeah.
That game, the St. Joseph's game, I mean, you talk about a team that they beat the team we're about to play by 40. So I don't think we can go in and say, oh, Kentucky should beat Stonehill by 60, but you have to imagine, even as good as I think St. Joseph's is, I still can't see a world where Kentucky is going to drop one of these games prior to Miami. I mean, St. Joseph's is a good team. Marshall's a good team. Stonehill shouldn't be any kind of competition, but I just can't see a world where Kentucky is playing these teams close.
No,
I want it on the record. I have Kentucky beating St. Joseph's. I have it. It's they're I have them beating them. But when you have a young team like this, especially one who makes their identity such a random basketball oriented, one that can either win. I think Kentucky will win some games it shouldn't and maybe lose some games it shouldn't. And if I'm looking for any absolute shockers, St. Joseph's might be one of those. I know you want to say Marshall, but St. Joseph's might be one of those. And again, I have Kentucky winning. I want that on the record. I'm just saying maybe Kentucky fans should not overlook this as much as some of them are.
I agree with Alden. I absolutely have it on record that I've got the Cats by a considerable margin, but St. Joseph's absolutely does bring, or you know what, I think what they bring is the potential for a first half scare. And part of that is because of their balanced scoring attack. In the game against Stonehill, they had 4 players in double figures. Xavier Brown was 21, right? I mean, they really stretched the floor well, which is something that Kentucky hasn't really seen that much all year, except for honestly the Kansas game with the ball movement. They're able to drive. They're not afraid to match the physicality that maybe Kentucky might try to bring. But beyond that, they've just got shooters. They can put the ball in the bucket, which is really, I mean, come on, guys. It is the most important part of this game. As the lights go off in the room. But no, I agree with Alden. I'm not worried at all about the performance of this game for Kentucky, but I do think that there's absolute potential for a quick run here and there, and that Kentucky's in absolutely no position to sleep or be complacent along the way. And if you excuse me, I'm gonna have to turn the lights back on.
Yeah, of course. I have obviously some stats written down here about that game. To me, though, it's not even the it's not even the Stonehill game that sticks out to me the most. Obviously they just obliterated Stonehill 156. They have a big win over 81 to 60 win over Lafayette. The one that sticks out to me the most is their 69-61 win over UPenn. And when that happened, it was like, okay, so what? Well, what happened since then? UPenn went in. Obviously Philadelphia hoops can be unpredictable, but they went in and beat Villanova. And maybe that has more to do with Villanova not being as good as people think they are. Maybe that has to do with, a little bit of struggles there with, succeeding Jay Wright. But as of right now, at the very least, that's a solid win. And you need to look at that as someone who can, at the very least, as someone who's beat a team who has beat a team that is ranked. So, noteworthy win there. I wrote down some numbers. I'm just gonna probably throw these at you because there's just a whole lot of figures. But when you look at kind of like you said with their scores, they've got 5 players averaging double-digit points. Their leading scorer is Eric Reynolds II. He's averaging 15.3 per game. He's 47.6% beyond the arc on 21 attempts. And anytime you can get as close to 50 as possible from deep, that's pretty good figures. So Kentucky will need to try to guard him around. Rasheer Fleming, 12 points per game, 5.3 rebounds per game, 60% from the field. Obviously good shooter there. Lynn Greer the third, maybe not shooter, but good scorer. Lynn Greer the third, 11.7 points per game, 5.7 assists per game. He's one who's looking to dish the rock around and create some offense. You just talked about Xavier Brown, one of the craziest we've ever seen Xavier spelled, by the way. It's Xzayvier. He's averaging 11.7 as well. He's 70% from the field on 20 attempts. So he is not missing very often. And he also is averaging 1.3 steals per game. So, Kentucky's going to have to, they've been pretty good so far about not having a ton of turnovers, having less than 5 in, I think, both their first 2 games, and then only having 8. They've yet to have more than 10 in a single game. And that was only 8 against the number 1 team in the country. But they got a guy who's looking to create those. So, you're going to have to guard the ball. You're going to have to hold on to the ball better. You got Cameron Brown only averaging 10 points per game, but still notable, 4 rebounds. And then their big center is, I believe his name is Christ Isendoko, I believe is how you say it. I apologize if I messed that up. He's averaging 6.5 rebounds per game and 2 blocks per game. We talked a little about Kentucky lacking a little bit of size. They've got some smaller guys, not necessarily tiny, but smaller guys. So going to have to watch out for him. Guys who like to drive in. I know Reeves has been driving a little bit. DJ's been liking to drive in. Justin's been trying to get it down low quite a bit. Going to have to watch out for Christ down there in the paint, because he might be looking to crucify any offensive players who are looking to get too bold.
Okay, well, besides the absolutely ridiculous pun there,
that was bad.
That was awful.
There's some good points there for sure. Outside of the fact that I think that you mentioned the guy who I'm blanking on his name. I had it in my brain 4 seconds ago. That was really good at creating turnovers.
Xavier Brown.
Xavier Brown. Kentucky just played 3 of the top 5 defenders in the country. I'm not worried at any point for the rest of the year. I'm not worried about anybody who's coming in that's a great defender, because Kentucky just put up 86 against a team that will probably end up as Ken Palm's #1 defensive team in the country this year. That's just how I feel.
Most likely. I guess the biggest point I'm trying to make with this one, Kentucky, theoretically, by the time we come back out here, they should have 2 more wins under their belts. That should be a given. But, this is one more so than Stonehill. They need to be on their guard a little bit more. I'm not predicting an upset. I'm not even trying to imply that it's going to happen. I'm just saying, don't overlook St. Joseph's, and watch out for the game to be maybe a little bit closer, like kind of like you guys said, maybe a first half scare, a little bit closer than it should have been. Maybe even only like a win in the teens, maybe not even in the maybe even single digits. But just watch out for that team, and really expect it to be a better game than some people are giving it credit for. I think people are sleeping on some mid-major basketball right now.
I think a fun way to kind of gauge the non-conference games against some of the lesser opponents in the season for the last couple of years has been the Brennan Canada meter of what % chance will Brennan Canada get into the game. I'd say Stonehill, it's about 90%. It's probably around like 30 to 40% against this team.
That's around 20%.
I'll take those.
You think 20%?
63%. It's 63%. That's my final number. Lock it in. It's coming. I'm confident that we're going to see a Brennan Canada appearance in the last 40-ish seconds of the game, kind of like how Cal always likes to do. 1 possession, give him 1 shot. Does it go in? Maybe. But
well, even beyond Brennan, what's the chance we see a Walker Horn, Grant Derbyshire entrance?
I don't know about that one.
I have no comments there.
That's a weird question.
But I mean, going back to your point about Xavier Brown Cole, yeah, he shot 30% from the field, but only on 20 shot attempts on the year. I think it's not necessarily a matter of volume out of him, but rather efficiency. Right. And that's just St. John or St. Joseph's in general. It's not necessarily a high volume, but the fact that they're so balanced, they have so many people that can create scoring opportunities. And with the way that they move the ball, the way that they space the floor, and the way that they're not able, or that they're not afraid to match the physicality that Kentucky likes to throw at a lot of teams, that's where that first half scare is going to come from. And that's something to watch. But I do agree. I don't think this is going to be a competitive game for very long. I don't see a world in which Kentucky doesn't pick up 2 wins or anything like that. But my question for the group is, other than a win, what is one thing that you want to see from this Kentucky team in these next 2 games?
DJ Wagner efficiency. I'll jump in there real fast. I want efficient DJ Wagner play.
Yeah, I gotta piggyback on that too. You gotta see the 2 possibly top prospects, lotto picks, perform. If you have those guys really cement their status and really prove how good they are, both on the having offensive efficiency while also being a defensive menace, which I know they can be. I mean, you got 2 prospects that can really lead the team in every category, and then lead them to possibly beyond that. You got to see them, and they have to get a get right game with this. I mean, if this is not the premium opportunity for a get right game, it has to be.
I was getting really frustrated in the Kansas game with some of the decision making by Justin Edwards. So I need to see him kind of bounce back quite a bit. I was very, very disappointed in his game. And a lot of I don't want to say IQ stuff, because he's got a probably better basketball IQ than I'll ever have. But some of the decision making and some of the really bad mistakes he made that you can't be making those. And I really want to see more of Reed Shepherd. He's shown a lot this year, and I want to continue to see more of him, especially as they get closer and closer to conference play, which feels ridiculous to talk about right now. But I want him to be someone who can be a key part of that lineup come that. And I think he's already started to show that. And I want to see him continue to blossom into just one of the best players in this team, quite frankly, because he's shown flashes. And
Yeah.
I also want to see a little bit more of a get your confidence back game for Antonio Reeves. I thought he had it against Commerce, but then he came out and had a good scoring numbers, but couldn't really hit from deep again against Kansas. So I want to see him have a game where he just absolutely goes off from beyond the arc.
Mm-hmm.
We are 1 month from North Carolina.
Oh my!
Once we hit North Carolina, the season starts.
Yeah,
That's conference play starting then, because you got North Carolina, Louisville, and Illinois State, and then you're into it. Louisville, I know that game doesn't sound like big to talk about, but that's gonna, for some reason in my brain, I can just feel the Louisville down by 5 with a minute and a half left feeling. So
here's my question. Here's a question for the group. This is a joke before we move over to the women's team. Out of the Kenny P's, who would be a better coach? Kenny Payne or Kenny Pickett?
Pickett.
I'm going Pickett. I think he's got more ball knowledge.
Pickett that hasn't turned the ball over in 5 games. Kenny Pickett.
Dang.
I'm going Kenny Pickett. But before we move on really quick, there's one thing I wanted to bring up, and I had a feeling you guys were all going to say, Justin Edwards, right? You talk about the get right game, decision making, Antonio Reeves, all of those things are very true. But something that I want to see is some more efficient half court offense from UK. I'd like to see Calipari run some sets, find a way to get guys open. You talk about the freelancing, the concept of dribble drive offense, but a lot of that is actually very scripted in their sets, and I think that is just a matter of meshing into that system. So I'd really like to see the dribble drive offense go to work, especially in the half court. Find a way to spread these guys a little bit thin when you've got them over match time size.
All right, and we kind of talked for a little bit here, maybe longer than we should have, but very different twist of fate for we had a lot of positives for the men's team. Now let's get to the women's team. Obviously, before we get into the big stuff, Alden, you were at the game. 82-54 win over SC Upstate, South Carolina Upstate. Thought there's a lot of positives out of that one. Can you just give me a brief rundown of some of the things you took from that game that were big?
82-54, and it was never that close. I mean, South Carolina Upstate just couldn't handle everything in the paint was the easiest thing you've ever seen. It was and one every time. The crowd was really nice, really loud. I was impressed because they closed off the upper levels of Rupp, and it looks full. I mean, it shocks me that the Cats are playing other places other than Rupp, like Transylvania and Georgetown, because I've now been to 2 different games, one a scrimmage, one an actual game at Rupp with the women there. And it's been a solid crowd both times. So the crowd, I think, really is something that can help this women's team, especially they seem to feed off the emotion really well. Asia Petty, of course, I mean, she's running up and down the floor, getting the crowd up. So she's a really fun player to watch. She kills people in the paint, it feels like. I mean, she could play on some lower Division II men's teams, I think. So that's another conversation for another time. But obviously, this game seems to be an outlier when you look at what happened against Austin Peay. So, Josh, what in the world happened?
Ooh, yeah, I had the pleasure, you could say, of watching that unfold in Georgetown, and I just want to say that. We can talk stats, we can talk performance, we can look at the film, right? But man, just walking into the gym, which it was a gym. It was not an arena by any means. That game was played in the gym, and walking in the gym last night, just the vibes were off. And I actually went with former Colonelite Parker Scott, and I told him. We rode up together, and I told him the second we walked in, I said, man, I got a feeling about this. The vibes are off. Something's weird. You just couldn't explain it. There was something in the air that just screamed upset and I guess disaster as well, because Kentucky fell. But we talk about Asia Petty. She had a very impressive performance regardless, 19 and 14 out of her. And you had 3 Cats in double figures with Tyler and Russell adding 11 each. Tyler actually in the second quarter, Cats were down by about 11. And she hit 3 threes to bring them within 2, which I was very impressed about. Kentucky is going to need her scoring when you start breaking into these harder teams. They've got NC State, who just knocked off UConn here in the Paradise Jam in about a week or 2. So they're going to need all the scoring that they can get to handle a team like that. But the biggest thing that caught out to me tonight, and I actually asked Kyra Elsie about it post game, was they missed 28 layups. Made 22 layups, missed 28. It felt like I was watching a high school game, just to be very, very blunt, in the sense that I think Kentucky was a bit complacent in terms of physicality. I think they thought that if they just threw bodies in the paint, that when the zone collapsed, that they were just going to be able to find their way through and get the ball into the rim. And that is not what happened. Instead, it bounced off. I mean, there were balls going up in the air and air balling from the paint. They were clanging off the sides of the rim, the fronts of the rim, the back of the rim, over the rim. It was you can't just drive in and chuck up the ball. You know, you've got to space the floor against the zone that Austin Peay brought. You've got to move the ball. You have to find shooters. You can't just drive in every single time. And it just seemed like as the game went on and as it worked less and less, Kentucky never really deviated from that strategy. And I guess and when I asked Coach Elsie about it post game, she looked at me, and I'll try to recreate it as best as I can. You just said we missed 28 layups. How can we be excited about that? I mean, she was pissed, just to be very blunt about it. I mean, I could see, it seemed like smoke was starting to build out of her ears a little bit when she found out that her team missed 28 layups. Honestly, who can blame her, right? Austin Peay was really impressive defensively, held the Cats to just 31% shooting. It was just on both ends of the floor, the Cats got beat. They led for 36 seconds in the game.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of just want to. After the ETSU game that was kind of close, we kind of talked about, let's not overreact to this. Let's kind of keep it close. I want to make sure people know this was not they lost a game against it. This was a bad loss. Let's not forget that Austin Peay started its season with a 16-point loss to Division II Trevecca University, a D2 school. Let's not forget that down the stretch when Kentucky needed buckets, they went 1 for 9. Let's not forget that Maddie Shear, the person that in all the editors' picks that was supposed to be the identity of this team, just wasn't there. I think she had an injury against SCF.
Ankle injury.
Didn't play. Petty had a double-double in this game, 19 points, 14 rebounds. But the team went, like you said, 31% from the field. That's 22 for 70. Abysmal. You talked about Sanaya Tyler's 3 3-pointers. Well, she went 3 for 13 overall. The entire team went 4 for 20. That's 20%. So only 1 3-pointer was made other than hers there. I mean, this was for lack of better, just disgusting basketball game by the Wildcats. And I mean, Petty had a good game, I guess, but there's no possible positive to take out of this. This was a really, really bad loss to me.
Alden, I see your finger up one thing really quick. I'm not necessarily saying that Sanaya Tyler had a good game. I'm saying she had a good quarter. And right. I do think that if there's any positive thing to take away from this, it's that she's shown a flash of an ability to score, and they're going to need all of that and more, especially at a night where just nothing could fall for the Wildcats. But go ahead, Alden. I'm sorry.
I have one massive positive. They made more than 2 threes. They matched their season total in threes in one game, which is improvement. They had shot, I think, 13 and then 11% in their first 2 games. So 20% is technically improvement. And I'm sure that when they look at that, it doesn't feel like it, but it is an improvement.
We're really grasping for straws there a little bit.
I would love to hear Kyra Elsie's response to that.
Yeah. The biggest problem I have here, and I know we've got to get out of here. We've been talking for quite a long time. This podcast has been going on for a little while, but you look at Kentucky's upcoming schedule. I believe they only have 1 game this week, which is against Florida Gulf Coast. They're 2-1. Their only loss was 67-51 against number 21 USC. They bounced back from that with an 81-48 win over FIU. I mean, that's a thrashing. I believe that's at Florida Gulf Coast, so there's no reason Florida Gulf Coast shouldn't beat them, respectfully. And then we'll talk about it a little bit more next week because that we'll have time. But then they go to 2023 Paradise Jam where they face NC State, Colorado, and Cincinnati. You talked a little about NC State getting that big win over number 2 UConn. Well, they're number 14 in the country. That's not even the biggest one. Colorado, number 5 in the country with a win over number 1 LSU at the time, number 1 LSU, in the first game of the season. And it wasn't really close either. It was a significant win. And then, I mean, you got Cincinnati at the end there, who's obviously the 3 dragons with the one being a little sillier than the other 2. That's Cincinnati right there at the end there. But, they had a respectable 18-point loss against Louisville, who's still very, very good. And after I expect them to lose 3 straight, I don't see them coming out motivated against Cincinnati. I don't see any world in which a Kentucky team that should be 3-0 right now doesn't go from 2-1 to 2-5 really, really fast.
I'm going to give a bit of an optimistic case. I know I know it might seem like the sky is falling, but I think I would really like to see how this team performs once they get Maddie Scher back. I don't know. Kyra Elder said post game that the timetable on her return is day to day, so it's possible that they'll have her for some minutes against Florida Gulf Coast. It's possible that, and if she truly is day to day, then you figure by the time NC State rolls around, Colorado rolls around, that they have her back. You know, they really miss on her veteran presence there, and I think, you know, if it's just it really just boils down to execution. That was the biggest thing that just seemed to be missing. At no point did it ever seem like Kentucky had it together, except for when they brought out the press and the trap. That was actually their most efficient segments of the game, was when they pulled out the press and the trap. And I'd like to see them run that a little bit more and try to push the pace. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with Kentucky pushing the pace, but it was the fact that they pushed, honestly, a little too much for their own good. I think if Kentucky can find a way to settle in, find the bottom of the rim for the love of everything, right? If Kentucky can find the bottom of the rim, if Kentucky can find a way to push the pace without pushing it beyond something that they can handle, if you can get Maddie Scher back, if Sanaya Tyler can continue to have an impact in the game, but maybe for longer than just one quarter, you know, it's a lot of ifs, but it's not necessarily that the pieces aren't there. It's the fact that none of them were together, and it was kind of like against ETSU. Kentucky had some of the pieces together, but there was still a lot to be left desired. Kentucky left absolutely everything to be desired against Austin Peay last night, and I'm really curious to see how the Florida Gulf Coast games go.
Yeah, we got to get out of here, but right before we do, I do want to mention very quickly that Kentucky men's soccer will have a win by the time this comes out on Thursday. They'll be one win away from, I think, a Sweet 16. With they'd be playing Notre Dame on Sunday, but they got to beat Xavier first. I think it'll happen. 2-1. UK takes a win over Xavier. Luke, how do you feel about that one? And then we'll get out of here.
Dude, I'm still in bewilderment of how they finished the regular season and then how they somehow scraped through Sunbelt to get in to the actual tournament is just beyond me. And so my faith has maybe been somewhat improved from where it was midway through the season. I'm not seeing them go anywhere. I mean, I wish, I hope, I really do, because I feel for the team. I feel for the lows that they were in. I mean, they were just in the dumps. They were in like the deepest, darkest pit that you can possibly be in for a soccer team, for a collegiate soccer team. And then to somehow get enough points to get true 2 draws against 2 of the best opponents in the nation was something I never saw coming. I mean, they were getting beat left, right, and center. They were not scoring goals. They were not efficient. They just looked disorganized. They looked out of place. They did not look cohesive. They come in, they get 2 solid results. They get through the Sun Belt, and then boom, they're here. I mean, so if that shows resiliency, and it's something that I love to see. And so hopefully, I mean, against Xavier, I don't really know much about them. I'm going to have to do some more research. But, you know, hopefully, yes. Hopefully they can get through it.
Yeah, Kentucky comes into the tournament with wins or ties over 5 teams that made the 42-team field. Yeah. So we'll see what happens there. But I want to thank everybody who listened. We know Zoom is not the greatest thing, but we'll probably have to do it again next week because I don't think very many people will be on campus because it's Thanksgiving week. But we hope everyone has a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.